and gentlemen, I'd like to head over now with you into another topic. Our next session comes up. What's the connection, ladies and gentlemen, between psychology and transport, between psychology and mobility? This is something that we'd like to answer now with an inspirational talk about the psychology of sustainable transport. And with us is the professor of economic and consumer psychology. I'd like to say a short hello as he produced a keynote ahead of the event. So it's a pre-recorded keynote, but that's all the better for you because now you can ask him directly your questions. I just want to say hello to Dr. Florian Kutzner. And I hope you can hear me well. Wonderful, Florian Kutzner.
Hi.
Lovely to have you on board. So just before we're heading into your keynote and before we, of course, giving you all our different questions into the chat, what is the connection, or why is a psychologist actually interested in a thing like transportation, transport, mobility? What is the connection?
I think the answer has been given many times in the talks and comments already, right? That we need people to behave differently, that to actually make the different mobility work. This goes from acceptance of novel technologies, smart and integrated cars. It's not a no-brainer that people are going to actually use them, to biking and cycling and actually feeling happy and healthy about it, right? Which is the most important determinant of them doing it.
Thank you, Florian Kutzner. So we're looking forward to hear more. The stage is all yours. The keynote will start, and you will be available in the chat for all the questions that comes from you, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are based.
Thank you.
Hi. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Florian Kutzner. I'm a psychologist working on sustainable behavior change. And I want to invite you today to think about 5 aspects of the psychology of sustainable transportation. About habits, habituation, trust, reasons, and context. And this is going to be about biking in bad weather, something I'm very experienced with, but not only. So let's start with habits.
Hallo, ja, alles gut. Geht's Ihnen auch gut?
It's not exactly rocket science to see that humans are creatures of habits, and mobility behavior is probably one of the more habit-prone areas of our lives. But let's not despair. Habits can be changed. For example, every time the tube strikes in London, a fraction of people, about 1 in 20, stick with their new routines. Walking, biking, or going back to the car. And now you might say, yes, but imposing strikes is not exactly the business I'm in. True, but you might think of more subtle, more benign ways of interrupting habits. For example, handing out a temporary free public transportation ticket. There's pretty good evidence that this actually increases public transportation usage. It's even more effective if you target people when they are already on a change point in their lives, when they are moving, when they have a new job. And then this actually doubles uptake rates from tickets ranging from a day to a month. And probably this is the case because they feel capable of doing the new transportation afterwards. They have an increased feeling of what we call self-efficacy. But then, of course, you might not be willing to hand out free tickets all the time, and you might be thinking about more restrictive measures. Which brings me to my second point, habituation. So what might they be, these more restrictive measures? Well, you might think of crowding out parking spaces in inner cities, using pop-up parks like this one in Sao Paulo, or bike lanes like this one in San Jose, Costa Rica. You might introduce zoning and fees. And then you might wonder, what will the electorate respond? Will they be angry? And the answer is, yes, they will. Take the analogy of smoking bans that are continuously introduced around the globe. Smoking bans in public spaces, in workplaces. They are met with anger in the beginning. But then, and now we come to habituation, if you ask people a couple of months into the smoking ban, they're actually quite happy with it. Again, they have experienced that they can handle the new situation, smokers and non-smokers alike, and they even see the benefits. So usually, habituation plays in your hands if you try to change people's environments with more restrictive measures. Yet, no matter how you're going to try to change people's mobility behaviors, you're going to be faced with the question of what and how to communicate. And this to me has two central aspects. One is trust, and one is the reasons you provide. Let's first talk about trust. And let me start here with a personal anecdote. For me, as a passionate commuter by bike, I'm really fed up with people trying to tell me that biking is this marvelous, sexy nature experience that's additionally healthy, where I sweat, I freeze, and sometimes I crash. And that's one of the essences of communication for trust. Be honest, or in other words, show integrity. Don't tell people what it is not you're trying to make them do. Say what are the upsides, what are the downsides. Be honest about who it is that might be affected negatively by your interventions. For example, those who need the car to commute. Then show benevolence. Tell them, look, here are the trade-offs between the needs of different groups in our society. And here is how I know, because I did surveys or discussion groups or consultations. And then be again transparent about how you made trade-offs and compromises. And optimally create something like compensatory schemes for those negatively affected. And finally, show competence. Show that you will evaluate what intervention works and which one doesn't. Show when it is deemed a success and when a failure, and roll back unsuccessful interventions. That's how you build trust, showing integrity, benevolence, and competence. So why am I still biking to work? Well, because I have my reasons. But what are those reasons? You might also be asking yourself when trying to devise communication materials. And the trouble is, from a psychological point of view, there is good reasons and there is less good or bad reasons. Let me illustrate with an example of Norway and the electrification of transport. So Norway has spearheaded the uptake of electric cars. There are lavish subsidies. They have privileges in inner cities. You can use bus lanes and you can have free parking reserved for electric cars. And it worked. But these strong incentives came at a cost. People tend to have electric cars as a second, third, or fourth car, and they tend to use them more at the expense of more active forms of mobility. That's what you could term a rebound effect. For doing something good, you tend to slack off a bit in other domains. You find these effects everywhere, and they jeopardize parts of the gain you can make. If you hook yourself up to a sustainable energy source for your heating, you tend to heat a little more. If you get yourself a more energy efficient air conditioning, you tend to cool a bit more. And these rebound effects are usually related to reasons for taking the actions that come from the outside. External incentives. So what are the other reasons? The good reasons. Those are reasons that reside within the identity of the person. I bike because I consider myself as someone caring about climate change. That's it. Full stop. It probably would be even more effective if I considered myself as somebody of a group of people or a movement working against climate change. Because this creates a social norm that doesn't allow me to compensate once I've done something good. So how can we make people care about sustainable mobility for who they are rather than for the incentives we provide? And I think that's a difficult point. But the maxim must be, for your communications, be subtle. Don't overwhelm people with dozens of arguments in one direction, because they're going to be likely counter-reacting.
Which brings me to my last point, context.
The power of context, or the power of the situation on our behavior, is often the forgotten story in psychology. We tend to explain what people are doing for reasons that reside within them. Don't they want? Don't they understand? Are they not capable of? That's what psychologists call a fundamental attribution error, and in a way, that's what I've fallen prey to in the presentation so far. And it's okay, because part of our behavior is explained for internal things. But much of the variance in our behavior is explained by the situation we're in. And that's harder to gauge. Let me illustrate this with a project we did in Costa Rica with GIZ, where it was about using buses more. So what we found is that people were actually quite motivated to use buses for a variety of reasons we could all subscribe to, but that there was one crucial barrier: predictability of when buses would arrive where, and that prevented many to use them. So, psychological project over? No, because now we started working on the context, digging into the reasons why was predictability so low. And one of the main reasons was that bus operators couldn't communicate officially where buses were, at what time, because they hadn't been allowed or able to adjust their routes to change demands. And again, digging deeper, we found that there was no system in place to change the routes. So the project, starting as a psychological project, ended as a psychological project, but not with a target group of users, but with a target group of those enabling the situation of how to use buses. I hope that these 5 points about the psychology of sustainable transportation, habits, habituation, trust, reasons, and context, were a little bit inspiring, and that I wasn't too blatant and obnoxious in communicating them. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Florian Kutzner, for joining us at the Transport and Climate Change Week 2021. It's been a pleasure to have you on board, and of course, thanks for answering all the questions in the chat. A lively discussion. Thank you for joining us, and of course, for pre-recording a very interesting session.